All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Karman Wong. I'm the moderator for this debate, which is being co-hosted by Animal Justice, the Montreal SPCA, Vancouver Humane Society, World Animal Protection, and the BC SPCA. Before we get started with introductions and the formalities, I want to let you know if you need interpretation, we have that ability to interpret from English to French and French to English. If you look for the button just at the bottom of your screen. You can choose the language that you'd like to hear in, and you'll be able to hear the original audio on background as well. I want to officially welcome our candidates who are joining us, our debaters. We've got Nate Erskine-Smith with the Liberal Party. We have Alistair MacGregor with the NDP, Yves Perron with the Bloc Québécois, and Elizabeth May with the Green Party. Thank you all for being here. Taking time out of your busy campaign schedule. Animal welfare, it is not always top of mind during an election campaign, but it is an issue that many Canadians care very deeply about. In fact, in a 2024 Nanos poll, we found that 43% of Canadians would be more likely to vote for a political party during an election if they support stronger animal protection laws and policies. And by the way, I just remind everyone in the 2021 federal election, it was historic in being the first election that some parties had animal welfare commitments in their platform. And animal welfare also has a lot of relevance to some of the top issues that we're talking about here today for Canadians, whether it be illegal trade across our borders, the impact of tariffs, Canadians wanting to buy local, the price of food, protecting supply management, the need for Canada to step up during the pandemic risk, given the US funding cuts and given that we have a science and vaccine skeptic running the US Department of Health. So for all those reasons, this is important. That's why we're here. I want to go over some of the rules of the debate before we get started. We have about 11 pre-scripted questions. We may not get to all of them, but I want to give you each a minute to respond to that. There's no opening statements. And I'd also ask if you could speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters as well. And a reminder that the host organizations and our viewers really want to know where your party stands on these issues. So if you want to add what you would do as an individual to advance these issues within your party or parliament, that's fine, but we would prefer if you start with your party's position. We also have media and participants that have an opportunity to ask their own questions at the end of the debate. You can do that by using the Q&A function to submit a question. That's also at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote your favorite questions so we can see those come to the top. And a reminder that this debate is brought to you by charities. So questions that are partisan, meaning they support or oppose a party or candidate, those will be removed. We may only have time for one or two of those questions, but the candidates here will be able to see them and consider them as issues that we all and Canadians all believe are important. Okay, so let's get started. Thank you once again. Welcome, everyone. And our first question is about wildlife captivity and entertainment. Canada banned whale and dolphin captivity in 2019. Similar legislation, Bill S-15, which would have banned elephant and great ape captivity, passed Senate late last year, but it failed to pass through the House of Commons before this election was called. Would your party commit to bringing back Bill S-15 and passing it or similar legislation to ban the keeping of elephants, great apes, and potentially other species, such as big cats that do not thrive in captivity? And I'll start with Mr. Erskine-Smith. Over to you.
Thanks very much. And thanks for hosting this, to all the organizations that help put this together, and for everyone who's joining here. It's you rightly said it's an issue that is under discussed sometimes in elections, but it's an issue that really matters nonetheless. And I'm glad that we're all joining here. And to your specific question, I had the good fortune of being the House sponsor of the Jane Goodall Act when it was a private member's bill. Murray Sinclair was the senator who had introduced it, and the government adopted a version of that through S-15. And if we have the luck of being reelected, and you'll certainly see, it's not in the platform, which I would be interested in getting to a conversation about what's in platforms and what's not. But there is a commitment to reintroduce and to pass S-15.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. MacGregor, you're up next.
In a short answer, yes. But I would also like to echo Nathaniel's comments in thanking the organizations for hosting us. I was very privileged to be a part of the 2021 debate, and it's great to see this kind of a focus on these particular issues, which I know are really important to Canadians. It is a shame that the House of Commons schedule was a bit of a mess last year, and that this bill only did get through the Senate. But to just expand on your question, I think there are so many opportunities that Canadians have to learn about these magnificent animals as they live in their home environments, their natural environments, without subjecting them to captivity. And I think that should be the underlying premise for how we deal with this issue.
Ms. May?
Thanks so much for the question, and I'm glad it started with the bill that I sponsored through the House in concert with the Senate. So it was a bill that started in the Senate, for people who pay attention to these things and the trivia of it, a bill that has an S dash number, starts in the Senate, C dash number, starts in the Commons. So it was in concert with two wonderful senators, the late Senator Murray Sinclair and Senator Wilfred Moore from Nova Scotia. The bill started in the Senate as S203, and that's one of the strongest pieces of animal rights legislation in the world. The bill that banned the keeping of cetaceans in captivity is one of the only pieces of legislation in the world that, or maybe the only, that recognizes the rights of an individual animal. Because in making decisions about whether an animal can be taken in, a whale, dolphin, or porpoise, captivity for purposes of medical treatment, the question is the best interests of that animal. Yes, of course, I want to see Bill S15, the Jane Goodall Act. I want to see it passed. We support it coming back to the House. I will make reference throughout the debate to what's in our actual platform in terms of recognizing the rights of sentient beings. You can find our animal rights policies on page 33 of the English version of the platform and on page 37 dans la version française. Alors, je termine là parce que c'est 1 minute 20 secondes.
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. Perron?
Thank you very much for this opportunity for this, and thank you very much for all the organizers. For the Bloc Québécois is always open for all the favorable. We have adopted, we voted also for this intention. What is important for these issues for the animal welfare is it has to be always put up front, but also it's issues with health issues. So we have 70% of the infections come from the wild animals. So when we do the trades of these animals, we risk the higher the risk is for the health. And the issue is for the Bloc Québécois is that because there's already a lot of standards and norms, especially here in Quebec. So we are in favor also because always in respect of all the laws in the legislation in Quebec. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And for anyone who's just joining us now, I also want to repeat again that we do have interpretation available, and you can access that by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen, either English or French. Choose the language that you'd like to hear interpretation in. Okay, moving on to our next question. It is about wildlife trade and fur farming. Canada imports and exports millions of wild animals and animal parts every year for the exotic pet trade, fashion, entertainment, and other purposes. And this drives biodiversity decline and the spread of zoonotic diseases and invasive species. The vast majority of new and emerging infectious diseases over the past decade has originated from animals and mainly wildlife. In addition, the intensive fur farming of wild animals not only causes immense animal suffering, but it's been identified as a key driver of pandemic risk. In 2021, the outbreaks of COVID-19 were detected on mink farms in several countries, including in Canada. And in response to that, British Columbia banned all mink farming. So my question is, what would your party do to address the wildlife trade? In addition, would your party support banning fur farming in Canada? This one will start with Mr. MacGregor.
Thank you. So you've got a two-part question here. So let's start with the first one. I think in the first one, with regards to the international wildlife trade, the answer to your question was actually in the preamble. As evidence is very clearly shown, international wildlife trade has led to habitat destruction, but it also has led to the introduction of very new and novel diseases, right? Diseases that survive in, say, a tropical habitat now are becoming a global phenomenon. And one of the corridors through which they are spread is through the international wildlife trade. So that is, I think, the answer to the question of why we have to look at this issue very seriously and really crack down on it, because there are a lot of unsavory characters that operate in it as well. On fur trade, I think it's great to be following the BC NDP's example here in my home province of British Columbia when they did ban mink farming. And I think with all farming in particular, we need to step away from the what and the why and focus more on the how as we treat all animal farming, is like how it is done, because there's a very wide spectrum on how farming is done in this country.
Okay, Ms. May?
Thanks so much. Again, the wildlife trade, and c'est dans la réponse déjà de Monsieur Perron. Nous avons une menace vers la santé publique. So we also, and Alistair mentioned it too, when we're looking at wildlife trade and wildlife markets, there's a very large risk to human health as well as the issues of the well-being and care for the animals themselves. So we favor a ban on the wildlife trade and fur farming within Canada. No question, it's a very small portion of our economy. Very few people rely on it. There's no reason not to move to ban fur farming. And that's the official position of the Green Party, although it didn't make it to our platform because we had to compress things. Just so you know, if you don't see it in the platform, please take my word for it. It's our policy.
Monsieur Perron?
Oui, merci.
Monsieur Perron, thank you very much. Ms. Wong, Mrs. May speak about her platform. I will speak about my platform as well. I will invite you to look at it. It's a very beautiful platform. On this question, that is very important. I spoke about this on my first question. It really, the issue in the health is extremely important. And I think we have to act on this. We have to do it in the right way. But if we decide to go into the ban of international fur trade, we have to put in, this trade is always done illegally, so it's not touched by the legislation. But if we don't put in the efforts and the money towards, it's the issue is because it's for the health and safety of Canadians. I will remind you also that when we have to go into legislation, we have to think what's happening in the different provinces in this country, also in the position of the federal government.
Okay, Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Well, I'll start with the Liberal position. I mean, the Liberal Party's long opposed illegal wildlife trade, and in the 2021 platform made commitments around that. There have been regulations put in place in 2023 in some regards, at least. When I was telling party folks that I was doing this, I was saying, we don't have enough in the there's no animal commitments in the platform for reasons of the priority focus on Donald Trump and all things economic. And so I said, well, we've got to be committed to a range of different things on animals. On Easter Sunday, the Carney campaign put out a video saying that they were committed to protecting animals. And so I got language back specifically that says reduce the commercial trade in wild animals to address animal welfare, environmental, and health risks. And then on a personal note, let me just say, I've introduced legislation to ban fur farming. I've also introduced legislation to better draw the link between the wildlife trade and a One Health approach, this idea that animal health, human health, and environmental health are interconnected. And through the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act, really focused on that connection and sought to phase out disproportionately risky activities like fur farming.
Okay, thank you. We'll move next to overseas horse exports. Canada breeds and transports horses to Japan for slaughter, where they are eaten as a raw delicacy in high-end restaurants. Banning the export of horses overseas for slaughter, it was introduced in the Minister of Agriculture's mandate letter in 2021. And then Bill C-355, which would have banned horse exports, passed in the House last year, but failed to pass through the Senate before this election was called. The question is, would your party support banning the overseas export of horses for slaughter? And for this, we'll start with Ms. May.
Absolutely. And Bill C-355 unfortunately died on the order paper January 6th. A lot of good bills died. We've got to bring them back fast. We should be able to prioritize, I would hope, by unanimous consent between parties, that some of those bills that died that have already passed the House be given priority to restart faster than having to start from scratch. That's something Parliament can do. It just takes political will. Banning the export of live horses, and God bless Jan Arden for making this an issue everybody understands. Horse shit, excuse me. We need to ban the live export of horses. It's an abomination. I don't think I need to say more. It's a priority.
Mr. Perron?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je suis très heureux que vous posiez la question, en fait.
Thank you very
Nous,
much. I'm
on
very
a
happy
au
that you have
Québec
asked the
toujours
question.
priorisé le
We at the
bien-être
Bloc
animal.
Québécois,
Quand ce projet de
we
loi-là a
look
été
at
déposé en premier
we're
lieu,
concerned about
on a
the
soulevé des
welfare,
questions
animal
sur pas
welfare.
seulement les
We
sources,
brought the
pas
questions,
seulement
but not only
par
the
avion, mais on
horses,
voulait faire une
not
étude
only
aussi
about
approfondie,
by
ce qui n'était pas
airplane, but
rendu
we also did
possible
some
dans
more
la modification du
research
projet de loi. Au
in the
départ, c'est
modifications
contre le
to the
principe.
law.
Et
It's
ensuite, on
against
a
the
été
principle, but
l'étudier en
then
comité.
we
Puis après
studied
le travail en
as a
comité,
committee,
vous avez
and
certainement
after the
remarqué que
work
le
was
Bloc
done at the
québécois a décidé
committee,
de laisser
the Bloc
passer ce bill-là.
Québécois,
Donc, notre
we
position a évolué en tant
asked to
qu'étude
pass the law, and
sur cette question-là. Mais
so
la
the
préoccupation de
law,
départ
the bill is
compte
still
toujours. C'est bien
in
de dire
search, and it's good
protéger
to
le troupeau, mais
say, we can
est-ce
say
que quand
we
il utilise les
protect
autres
the
transports,
horses, but what about the
est-ce
other
qu'on s'assure de
transportation
toujours
methods?
assurer de
Do
bonnes
we
conditions
always
de
make
vie à nos
sure
animaux?
that
Est-ce que c'est normal,
these
par
have
exemple,
good
je donne un
conditions of life
exemple, de
conditions for
transporter
these
des bœufs
animals?
jusqu'en
So let's
Pennsylvanie pour
say
les faire abattre?
for
Il me
so
semble que là, il y a
do
quelque
we
chose de
have to
très
transport these
incohérent.
animals,
Donc,
let's say for
évidemment, ça pose
Pennsylvania
problème. Mais
to
pour la réponse à
for the
votre question,
slaughterhouses?
c'est
So when we
ensuite,
speak about this
on a laissé passer
question,
la loi. C'est triste,
we
par
did
contre, que le
let go of
Canada
this
ne soit pas une véritable
this law,
démocratie. Il fallait
but
seulement
unfortunately,
appuyer
Canada
plusieurs
is
de nos
not
projets de
a
loi,
democracy,
dont celui sur
and
la
that the
reproduction.
Senate
On
doesn't
aura
act
sûrement l'occasion de parler.
also for these laws, and unfortunately for the supply management question as well.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Yeah, so this is a commitment that was in the 2021 platform. And if you backtrack further, and it's a credit to, as Elizabeth says, Jan Arden, but also more broadly, the Horse Defense Coalition. There are a lot of voices that really leaned into this. And Elizabeth and I were part of an all-party animal welfare caucus that we put together. We heard direct testimony from experts in animal science that said there is no possibility of transporting horses in this manner in a humane way. No possibility. And with that evidence, we were able to secure a commitment in the platform. I credit to my colleague Tim Lewis for introducing a private member's bill. The bill should have been passed in the last parliament. It should have been passed. The reason it was not passed is because not just some random senator, but the conservative the conservative Senate leader, the leader of the conservatives in the Senate, spent months and months and months blocking that legislation. Otherwise, it would be passed. And if we are reelected, we are going to support that legislation and make it law.
Mr. MacGregor?
I was the lead spokesperson for the NDP in this bill. We supported it all the way through its journey in the House of Commons. And, as Nathaniel said, the shame is on the Senate side. And that's the problem with introducing this type of legislation as a private member's bill. Like, congratulations to Tim Lewis. Like, it was great that he did it. But I think it's a shame that it was in a ministerial mandate letter and it was relegated to a PMB because PMBs don't get the same kind of prominence that a government bill was. So I think the next time around, a government has to make this part of government legislation. It gets priority in the House of Commons, but it also gets priority in the Senate. And you can't just hold it up like you can a private member's bill. So that's the way it should be done the next time around.
Okay,
I agree with that.
When we're moving on to intensive animal agriculture. Raising animals in intensive farming systems where they live in crowded, barren environments and confined housing systems like gestation crates and battery cages. It causes immense animal suffering and it creates public health threats. And this is why many Canadians, when they learn about how the meat and eggs on their plate were raised, are looking towards their elected representatives to do something about intensive animal agriculture. The question is, what would your party do to address the problems associated with this type of farming? We'll start with Monsieur Perron.
Thank you for this important question, which comes from the element that I bring to all the answers from the beginning. The well-being of all animals, it comes to all decisions that we make. It's our main focus. When it comes to intensive and conditions that are extreme, where animals are too close to each other, so it's not acceptable. So we have always been in favor to maintain businesses or family businesses, and that's one of the reasons why it goes with our bill. bill to protect dairy farms. So for a business which is 10,000 in the States, so it's an example that I'm giving you how vast it is. So also I've mentioned earlier the long transportation when we send animal for slaughtering. We have to work on that because we have to develop an infrastructure to transfer regional transformation in terms of slaughtering animals, which improve the quality of product, but also accessibility of regional products for the clients in the vicinity. Also, they will increase the quality of life of the animals and the well-being of the welfare of animals. It's at the center of all our issues, and we are in favor to the biological. So I forgot my time. I don't know how much time I have. So, so you understand the essential of our situation.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, I think, look, this is the most challenging question we're likely to confront in this debate because there is such a serious economic case for, if any time I've touched animal welfare legislation, put it this way, there's an argument from a range of different industry to say it's the slippery slope, it's the thin edge of the wedge. What's next? What's next? And look, you got to acknowledge, and everyone should acknowledge, animal agriculture, there's people's livelihoods depend upon animal agriculture in this country, and I understand why people get their backs up when we start to talk about animal welfare sometimes. And so I think your question just around focusing on intensive animal agriculture and the negative health consequences, again, that One Health approach, Health Canada does some of this work through addressing antimicrobial resistance and overuse of antibiotics. But look, we have voluntary codes, frankly. And when you talk about battery cages, the voluntary code's set to phase it out by 2036. When you talk about gestation crates, the voluntary code was set to phase it out by 2024, and then industry shrugged their shoulders and said we can't do it in time, so it's 2029 now. I'm not speaking on behalf of the party here because they don't have a position on this, but I will say we all collectively need to make sure that those voluntary kinds of codes move away from being voluntary, that there's teeth to them, and that animal welfare is a component that gets real enforcement.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, there's no question that economics is driving a lot of this, right? And we all know as elected representatives that food prices are a very sensitive subject, especially over the last few years. Like my constituents, so many of them, it's impacted both the quality and quantity of food that they've been able to purchase because of prices. So that's one thing that the government needs to focus on is, how do we make sure that people can afford to eat and feed their families? So how do we address this? Well, there are ways. The government could step in and give more legislative powers and oversight to things like the existing National Farm Animal Care Council. I've always maintained a really great working relationship with organizations like the Small Scale Meat Producers Association. They really try to focus on regenerative agriculture because we have to realize that healthy farming requires a holistic approach. It requires both plants and animals working together and trying to mimic the natural environment. And organizations like that, made of small, dedicated farmers, are really leading the way. And other farmers are more likely to listen to other farmers than an Ottawa knows best approach. So we have to keep that in mind as a part of this conversation.
Ms. May?
Yeah, I'm really pleased with the details in our platform this year on animal welfare to create independent ministry responsible for animal welfare, security, and separate from agriculture and agri-food, with comprehensive legislation that will deal with all aspects of farm animal housing and welfare, and also supporting farmers who want to transition from animal agriculture to sustainable plant-based agricultural practices. There's a lot of details here, but there's no question but that we have to recognize that we can't let the agricultural lobby keep blocking animal welfare legislation, as it did to Nate's terrific bill back in 2015. And I thought, oh, it's coming from a Liberal MP, it'll get passed. So we have to recognize.
Don't remind me, Elizabeth. Don't
remind
me.
I'm reminding us all. It was awful, right? Horrible. But we have to look to the European Union, where agriculture is still a significant component of their economy. Agricultural producers survive on their income, which is very hard to do in Canada because we've made cheap food more important than healthy food. And as a result, you look at the EU, where they have minimum sizes for battery cages. They have strict rules for transport of livestock. Those are the regulations embraced by the Green Party of Canada. And we think it's really important to also point out, why are eggs more expensive in the US than here? Because of agricultural lobby success in the US, where there's no limit on how many hens you can have. You can have millions of egg producing poultry in a barn. That's why egg prices have gone out of sight in the US. And thanks to supply management in Canada and smaller agricultural production, our egg prices aren't a source of scandalous increase in prices. In fact, inflation in food in Canada has gone down recently. It's around the 2% mark, but we are facing a climate crisis, which also has to do with industrial livestock production. The climate crisis causes food inflation. So these are very interrelated issues. So we have to face it. We have to talk about it. I agree. We can't ignore the people in Canada that rely on industrial methods of agriculture to feed their own families. But we have to really put industrial intensive livestock operations under the microscope and point out that they're the source, not local production of livestock in small farms. That's not where we get deaths of listeriosis and spreading of significant illness in the human population. Small scale, sustainable agriculture can include animal agriculture, but industrial scale livestock operations and confined feedlots have to end.
Thank you, Ms. May. Let's move on to plant-based food. Canada's food guide encourages Canadians to eat more plant-based food. And this is not only good for our health, but it also helps to address climate change. Yet Canada's plant-based food sector receives far less government support than the animal agriculture sector. The question is, would your party support increased federal government investment in the plant-based food sector? Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, I'll say a couple different things. So one is, I think it was an incredibly important step to put the food guide as it is in place. It was subjected to a lot of lobby pressure the other way, and the government rightly stood its ground and said, no, we want it to be science-based, which of course means that it's more plant-based and principally plant-based. The second thing is to say there have been some efforts to operationalize the food guide, but I would say certainly not enough. And so we've seen over $150 million in funding directed towards innovation in the plant-based space. My own view is I think we can, be a bit more strategic about the funding, and I'll give an example and leave it at that. In 2011, the Harper government actually, they gave money to Colleges and Institutes Canada to basically update culinary curricula all across this country to reduce sodium. And I think there's an opportunity, and if I'm reelected, I'll certainly try to secure funding in this way to ensure that we are doing the same thing, same model, but we're updating the culinary curricula to be training the chefs of tomorrow to be familiar with and to incorporate the food guide and to be more familiar with plant-based. Because I think there are more strategic ways we can drive change and operationalize the food guide, including in the last thing I'll say is just on the National School Food Program. When we are federally, which we aren't always, but when we are in the space of food and directing food programming, we should make sure that it's consistent with our own policy, the food guide.
Mr. MacGregor.
Well, as a former Canadian Produce Marketing Association produce champion, absolutely yes. I think it's fantastic that the food guide recommends a half your plate be fruits and vegetables. And look, we've got tremendous capacity in Canada. And this is a moment in time, right, with the trade war that's going on with the United States and the fact that we rely on so much produce and fruit coming up from the United States. This is a time when we can look to build resiliency in local economies. And I know there are so many farmers who are growing those fresh fruit and vegetables who would love to fill in that gap. So they absolutely do need supports. I've been very happy to work with the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. I've worked with the Canadian Organic Trade Association. We need an organic strategy for Canada. But we also have to pay attention to Canada's business risk management programs, because farmers who are growing fruits and vegetables are particularly susceptible to the ravages of climate change. And the farmers will be the first ones to tell you they are on the front lines of climate change. They need to have nimble and adaptive business risk management programs to help support the sector when they are hit by those climate catastrophes. But otherwise, yes, we have tremendous potential. We should make sure that we are living up to the Canada Food Guide and supporting our hardworking farmers who are producing that amazing produce right across this great country of ours.
Ms. May?
I totally agree with what my colleagues have said. We need to have more focus and financial support for those portions of our healthy diet to educate people. And I'm very glad about the school food program. But like I just boast about my own riding for a minute. Salt Spring Island, Gulf Island Secondary School has a community garden as part of the school program. Kids get course credit for growing food organically, but then they get course credit for having in the school cafeteria preparation of healthy plant-based meals, and then they get healthy food for the kids in the school. And contrast that with my daughter who teaches in the Burnaby school system, and the kids come to school hungry. They don't have a school food program there, and she, on a teacher's salary, is trying to bring food into the classroom so her kids are able to learn and not be hungry. And being my kid, she never grew up on anything but healthy vegetarian food. So she can't stand that what the school's able to get when they finally got on the Jordan's principle and got some food was highly processed, snacky food that can last on a shelf without refrigeration, because schools have lost all the infrastructure to be able to have a fridge and a healthy place to cook food. So this is I know I'm taking it in a different direction, but we not only have to support farmers and the plant-based food industry, we have to really examine the extent to which the industrialized corporate unhealthy food model. We talk about health food, we can also talk about sick food. Sick food gets protection, health food doesn't get promoted, and plant-based agriculture needs a lot more financial support.
And Monsieur Perron.
Thank you for this important question for the plant-based farming. So for also to agriculture, which lacks support, which is disastrous, and all the risk management, okay, sometimes doesn't work very well in businesses. When we talked about the emergency program, which is supposed to compensate all the other programs that did not work, it took about 2 years to send money to businesses, so people had a chance to leave those businesses. So we have to start to be serious about it. However, we have to be vigilant, because it's nice to say that when we say in your introduction, it's nice to have proper vegetable plant-based and feeding. But when we have so for family businesses, we have to make sure that when you talk about agriculture, all the different factors, environmental benefits for the prairies, into biodiversity, and all the carbon dioxide in the ground. So we have to make sure we have. So the same thing with plant-based agriculture. It's not intensive agriculture. We use a lot of pesticides and herbicides. Maybe the environmental aspect is not that interesting. So the 4B, the 4 things in English, to use the phytosanitary products. We have to use intelligence and precision, but also to be there for the agriculture. We talk about 2% of the budget. We took 2% on the defense, but we have to. Can we be more serious? Okay, do the same percentage for the agriculture.
Just a follow-up question for Mr. MacGregor, and anyone else who might want to weigh in. You raised a good point about farmers on the front lines of the climate crisis, and animals we know are vulnerable too. And BC saw its largest agricultural disaster during the 2021 Abbotsford floods. So we're wondering if you and any other candidates who want to comment see a role for government to support farmers in building back better and more humane.
Yeah, and it's not only that, right? Because we had the atmospheric rivers, but we also have had devastating wildfires as well, and prolonged droughts. I mean, BC just seems to be getting battered again and again. So fire is just as great a risk to animals as floods are. And when you have extended periods of drought, that often affects the feed for animals, which can drive up costs. So yeah, all of these things have to be part, right? There's no one silver bullet. It's more like a silver buckshot approach, right? Like, these are very, very complex issues, and they are going to require multiple levels of government to work together along with farmers and consumers to adequately address them, for sure.
I just want to say, I mean, if we're looking at the climate crisis, we have to recognize, oh, sorry. If we're looking at the climate crisis, we have to recognize the contribution of greenhouse gases from particularly the livestock operations of confined industrial feedlot operations. Agriculture as a whole is a contributor to global warming and, as we've just said, a victim of global warming. And while we're thinking about what's happened to us in British Columbia, the heat dome in 2021 killed 619 British Columbians in 4 days. But what gets covered less is it killed 3 billion sea creatures from heat. So people who are, if you're experiencing a heat dome, heat stress that's a health threat, go down to the water to try to get cool, and you can't get close to the water line because of the stench. It was only later people figured out, oh, that stench was all the animals, the sea creatures that had died from the heat. And the same thing was happening in animal barns. The heat was killing animals in the barns. So the livestock hit from climate change, yes, it was floods. Yes, it was fires, and it continues to be a threat of a heat dome. And I don't see any level of preparedness out of the federal government or provincial government. I think the government of British Columbia, by the way, Alistair, was criminally negligent in the deaths of those 619 people because the heat dome was coming. We saw it coming in weather forecasts, and the BC NDP did nothing to call in a provincial emergency so we could have saved lives. So I remain bitter and angry. My stepdaughter was one of those who nearly died, and she's in her mid-30s.
Okay, if I could, I would say 3 things. One, I would echo and we just have to be honest about the facts and the science that industrial intensive animal agriculture contributes to climate risk, and it contributes to pandemic risk. And it's not about, we're not snapping our fingers. No one's saying we're going to eliminate agriculture. This is about managing and reducing risks in a responsible, evidence-based way. The second thing I will say is around emergency preparedness. Animals should be incorporated in emergency preparedness plans. Of course they should be. And the last thing, just on support for farmers, it's interesting when there are examples and models elsewhere. So when the UK phased out fur farming, they didn't just prohibit fur farming and leave it at that. They actually transitioned farmers by effectively compensating farmers that were in the space through the phase out. And so there are certainly models for supporting farmers to transition to other things as well, as for example with fur farming, if we were to phase out that activity.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. And oh, sorry, Mr. Perron, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's a very good question. I would like to. So the environment is very fundamental. We have spoken about it from the beginning. It's really decentralization and also to nurture. We have to trust our farmers who have both feet. They were the first ones that want to protect the land. So we do recognize also the environmental issues, and it's all something more precise. And we also, all the money that we lose, and the sum also will put down a cash down for the next method, and they will surprise us. They cannot do anything about conditions, climate change, and a lot of this comes from the climate change and also conflicts, and also the changes in the climate, and also the results also that come from the farmers. And for, let's say, the vegetable are the first victims of the climate change. So we have to see this in emergency. And when I hear people say, oh, it's national, it's international, and not doing anything is not acceptable. So we have to be leaders, international leaders. And here the debates, we have to, else than all the training that we have the government, we cannot abandon the fight. Maybe there's things that weren't done properly in the past, but it's really to inspire, let's say in Quebec.
Okay, I think there's a little freezing issue, but that's okay. We're going to move on, and maybe we'll get Mr. Perron back. The next question has to do with antimicrobial resistance. It has been identified as one of the top 10 public health threats this decade. About 70% of antibiotics used globally and in Canada are administered to farm animals to stop them from becoming sick in intensive farming systems. And there is clear evidence-based solutions to reduce that antibiotic use on farms by improving conditions for animals. The question is, would your party support phasing out preventative antibiotic use through improvements in farmed animal welfare. Ms. May, we'll start with you.
Yes, it's very clear the health evidence is overwhelming. We know that and this is part of our platform. Again, it's in detail that we need to have a holistic response for animal welfare and the linkages to threats to human health, as well as the well-being of the animals themselves. I think there's a trade issue here that we should be picking up on. When the U.S. Trade Secretaries, I don't know if you saw that rant. Anybody saw the rant about how unfair it was that Europe doesn't want U.S. beef in Europe? Well, they also don't want Canadian beef in Europe because our beef is treated with hormones and prophylactic use of antibiotics. And there's very clear evidence from the International Agency for Research on Cancer that steroid-treated beef is a health threat, which is why there are trade barriers for Canadian beef making it to the European Union. We want to uncouple and insulate ourselves from the United States on trade issues. One thing we have to do in the interest of our own economy is to make sure that we are getting animals off drugs, basically, in intensive feedlot operations. We should end intensive feedlot operations for many reasons, including animal welfare, but also for human health. And everybody who knows that when you put a bunch of animals together where it's kids in a daycare that spread the colds all around, fish in toxic fish factories, sometimes called aquaculture, same thing with animals. That's why they're getting dosed with prophylactic use of antibiotics, and they're getting steroids to grow faster, and unhealthy animals that we can't export to countries where we need to be able to have strong trading relationships. So yes, yes, and yes.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things, starting with the government, and then I'll go to my own views. So starting with the government, we've seen action on antimicrobial resistance. I would say there's, to use the jargon of the government, there's sort of a pan-Canadian strategy on this. And there's been modest but important funding, first in I think 2015, but then 2021 there was about $28 million, I think, that went to, and you're talking about research and development, you're talking about surveillance, and there's been other dollars that have gone to international efforts as well to address this, what is a global risk. And I remember when Jane Philpott was the health minister, I remember this is years ago, obviously, and I met with World Bank officials who were articulating the concern about superbugs and antimicrobial resistance and overuse of antibiotics even at that time, and the risks have not gone away. And so, yes, I think, my own personal view is, we obviously have, the government has a strategy in place. My own personal view is we have to take an even more concerted and ambitious effort on this. And that's partly what drove me when it came to the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act, ensuring that there was a clear focus and a clear-eyed focus from the government to table a report in Parliament, or a plan in Parliament, to say, here's how we are going to manage and reduce risks in relation to the connection between animal health, environmental health, and human health, and pandemic risks. And how are we going to reduce those risks? And that would include taking action specifically on antimicrobial resistance.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, I think I would start from, what is the worst case scenario? And the worst case scenario is getting a superbug that is resistant to our most powerful antibiotics, right? So antibiotics, right, they are effective at treating bacteria. This is not about viral diseases. This is about bacterial diseases. And again, so if that is the worst case scenario, what can we do to prevent that from happening and mitigate that? And, again, this is evolution. Bacteria multiply at such a fast rate, you are going to get those genetic mutations that allow one strain to be resistant to antibiotics, and then that strain is going to multiply, and suddenly you are caught off guard. So in any way that we can prevent the overuse of antibiotics, I have really appreciated over the years of working with organizations like the Dean's Council of agricultural universities right across the country. I think we also have to make use of the fantastic scientists that we have working in agriculture and agri-food Canada's facilities. Like there's a great facility in Summerland, BC, and right across the country. And just really make sure that scientists with the most up-to-date knowledge have a seat at the table, and that our policy is directly following their recommendations. And yes, again, making sure that animal welfare and any conditions that lead to their reduced responses to bacterial infections are being mitigated. Absolutely. I think that's got to be a a very important part of government policy going forward.
Okay. Monsieur Perron, we lost you for a moment, but the question is about phasing out preventative antibiotic use through improvements in farmed animal welfare.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry for the technical issues, but actually, I do say what Alistair adopted. You know, nobody wants to eliminate antibiotics for humans, but nobody wants to take it 3 times a day either. So it's something smart that we have to do. The more we avoid the utilization of these medications, and the more we will be a resistance, the more the animals will be in good health. Also, so look at what are the conditions of the farming when it's too intense, when the animals don't have space of life. So we see in Quebec, for the dairy products, we developed also the free thing, and it's something that changes and increases. It also brings the welfare, the animal welfare, and also so everybody wins in this. And I'll go and also speak about the centralized, and this is what I bring on each question. It's really the animal welfare. So before taking any decision, we have to always ask ourselves on the animal welfare and make sure that they have good, excellent conditions. It's a problem when we take these also. So Mrs. May also speak with the trades, free trade. There's work to do in the commercial side, in the trade side. So we have a healthy production that we have to keep.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about the Canadian Centre of Alternatives to Animal Methods. Canada has made significant shifts towards more humane science by taking steps to phase out toxicity testing. That was with the passage of Bill S5, and then by the banning of testing of cosmetics on animals. However, Canada's ability to implement these new laws through the development of humane non-animal alternatives was jeopardized when the Canadian Centre for Alternatives to Animal Methods was forced to close its doors due to a lack of public funding. The question is, would your party support government funding to help reopen the Canadian Centre for Alternatives to Animal Methods? And how else might your party support the shift away from animal testing? And for this one, we'll start with Mr. MacGregor.
Yeah, great question. I think Bill S5 was great, but again, this is a two-part problem, right? It's one thing to change the legislation, but you have to back it up with resources as part of the follow-through. And, you know, when I look at that example out of the University of Windsor, that is a shame that it didn't have enough funding to keep on going. And I think that speaks to the need for a strong federal commitment, given its responsibilities, both through Health Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Those mandates from both of those departments, I think, necessitate federal funding to provide the follow-through to the legislative change that was made in Bill S5. I don't know if I have like a specific level of detail. I think just making sure that year over year stable funding is provided is the important first step, and then letting an organization, as was run out of the University of Windsor, and there could be other candidates. I'll put a plug in for the University of Victoria or UBC. Right across the country, we've got great institutions. I think that would be, I would like them to take the lead, but they need to have that government funding in place to do that important work.
Ms. May?
I'll just read from our platform. Phase out animal testing and impose a nationwide ban, funding research and promoting ethical, cruelty-free alternatives. So obviously, we would fund that research, we would reopen that center, and we've made some progress with banning the testing of animals for cosmetics and so on, but we really must pursue cruelty, animal-free, and ethical alternatives for testing.
Monsieur Perron?
Mr. Perron, thank you very much, Mr. Wong. I would like to say it's scandalous to reduce the funding for those research institutions, and also Canada has, so instead of putting it, funding. We see lack of funding, and Quebec did adopt also for the S15 for modification on testing on animals. So of course we have to avoid at all costs all these toxicity tests. We are able to invent. We are smart, and we have the best brains in the world. But unfortunately, because of the lack of funding of these centers, institution, we don't. Doesn't make any sense. So we do have to act on this. And clearly, we want to adopt also to have more funding on this. And one day, as a government, we have to stop playing from 4 years to 4 years. We have to act for the next generation and act for the next generation. It's really to invest on research and development.
Yeah, so interesting. I was just texting with Dr. Chandrasekhar about this. She has led efforts for the Center for Alternative to Animal Methods and has rightly been frustrated and critical, and I think just generally exhausted because all that work is not being realized now that the center is shut down. And we've got to reverse course. And before we get there, I think it's important to understand when we were first elected, when I was first elected, certainly in 2015, none of this action was in place. There was no action on animal testing. And fast forward today, we've seen a prohibition on cosmetic testing, and we've seen a few things on toxicity testing on animals more broadly. We've seen legislative commitment to phase out. We've also seen a draft strategy through Health Canada to realize that legislative commitment. And now, to actually make the thing happen, we need dollars and cents behind that draft strategy. And, at the moment, the best party commitment that I've got is to explore the mechanism because, there are a few different ways you could imagine realizing this, whether directly in a budget or through CIHR. There are a few different ways you can imagine realizing the funding. And I'll just say my personal commitment is to make sure that center is reopened and to make sure that we are putting our spending power behind an initiative like this to realize the promise of the strategy, but also to do our part because other countries, the US, other countries in the EU are really committed to phasing out toxicity testing, and they are putting their dollars and cents in research and development behind it.
Okay, thank you. We've all sort of touched on this subject, but just to dig a little bit deeper, the next question, in recent years, there's been a trend towards the creation of government agencies or entities whose exclusive mandate is animal welfare, independent of any sort of conflicting economic interests. As an example of this conflict, Agriculture Canada, they're responsible for the welfare of farmed animals, but on the other hand, their mandate is to create the conditions for the long-term profitability of Canada's agricultural sector. So do you see any problem with the way that animal welfare is positioned within federal institutions? If you do, how would you address that? We'll start with Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Right. So I'll use an example of a clear-eyed problem, I think. And you mentioned the CFIA. Well, the CFIA has done an incredibly poor job of enforcing existing rules in relation to the live export of horses for slaughter. They've sort of thrown up their hands and said, nothing we can do. And we should have had regulations in place that are stronger, sure, but they could have done a lot more with the regs that are there. The second example I would give is in relation to transparency and consumer protections. You have a situation where when it comes to free-range eggs, for example, there is massive consumer confusion when it comes to the sustainability and humanity of egg production as between different producers and the way that they're advertised to consumers, and massive confusion for consumers. And what was CFIA focused on? They were focused on consumer confusion where there was no evidence of consumer confusion, but they were focused on doing a consultation on consumer confusion in relation to plant-based eggs. Okay, so here's a real problem. We have evidence of consumer confusion at scale, and they're not focused on that at all, but they're focused on consumer confusion, no evidence at all in plant-based eggs. So, that's just one example, but it's indicative of the challenge. As to the solution, I'll just say what I would love to see from a systemic perspective, and Humane Canada put this forward as a platform proposal, and a number of animal advocacy organizations were putting good ideas on the table, but this one came from Humane Canada. I think we should have a parliamentary committee that sits down, a member from every party that sits down. We hear from different stakeholders, both on the ag side and the animal welfare side and everyone in between. And we come up with unanimous recommendations for how we can improve animal welfare in this country, including taking action on some of these more systemic challenges. And I think instead of a piecemeal approach where you have one bill here and one bill there, a more comprehensive look from a parliamentary committee, a special parliamentary committee that makes recommendations that are then acted on by the government, would go much faster and further.
À moi? OK. Je n'ai pas votre son. J'espère que vous
Pardon
m'entendez.
me.
OK.
Mr.
C'est
MacGregor,
moi?
you're next. Pardon
OK.
me.
Monsieur MacGregor.
Was it? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we've had a similar problem with another ministry, DFO, right? It's got one of those dual purposes. Part of its mandate is looking after fish and fish habitat, but it's also responsible for like commercial fish licensing, and sometimes that can pull the ministry in two different and sometimes conflicting positions. And as a long-standing member of the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food, we also recognize the problems with CFIA, which also has its foot in two different ministries. You know, there is Health Canada, there's also the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food. So I think, yes, creation of a single purpose federal institution, I don't know whether it's a parliamentary committee or an agency of the federal government that has animal welfare as its core mandate, that could clear up a lot of the confusion. And I think I'd be very open to exploring that as an option. There's a number of different ways we can approach this. It's either, you know, you could take an existing organization like the National Farm Animal Care Council, you could beef that up, or you could create a separate entity. There's a number of different ways you can do this, but yes, I do agree with the premise of the question in that there are examples where having multiple mandates in one organization can lead to a lot of conflicts down the road.
Thank you, Ms. May.
Well, there's a clear conflict of interest. Certainly, Alistair mentioned DFO, but their worst conflict of interest is they both promote fish aquaculture and are supposed to regulate it. It definitely is the case with agriculture and agri-food. They're promoting cheap food exports. So that's their major goal. And there are a lot of stories about how this went when we got rid of the crow rate, and that was to help farmers ship grain out of the prairies. That was a long time ago, but the impact of that was that grain was piling up in the prairies. So that gave birth to one of the most egregiously cruel production methods for livestock, the mega hog barn. So they export hogs instead of grain, and the cruelty of those barns is unspeakable. Look, this is green policy, again, from our platform, create an independent ministry responsible for animal welfare, separate from agriculture and agri-food. That gets rid of the conflict of interest. Implement comprehensive animal welfare legislation that mandates humane treatment standards for all farm animals. These two steps would be comprehensive, effective, and are totally possible.
Okay, Monsieur Perron.
Yes, thank you for the interesting question. So the profitability, and it's not conflicting. It goes together. In Quebec, we're open to where we could coordinate for the animal welfare. However, I think that the animal welfare is an environment will be at the center of all decisions. So to create an organization which is parallel, we're going to end up with this separate ministry, so Environment Canada, to focus on environment and also animal welfare. So I'll give you as an example, I talked about this so their farm tabulation. So we take care of them. They produce more. So there's no conflict in terms of profitability in the country. So I would like to come back to what Mr. Smith mentioned in terms of exportation of horses. We have to be serious when we put something in a letter of mandates. I don't understand, which is a bill, which is a private bill, which is we know how the Senate hates private bill. So it has to be some government bill, which in order to have things to move forward. So we talked for the internal. So we talked the work that's coming at the House, whether there are people in place where the government has to make sure that these are these questions. So aggressively to all the bill in terms of the all the proposals. There are 3 different farms in the U.S. that could provide all the eggs for Canada. Only one of those farms, when meat comes, we talk about public health. All the questions that we ask ourselves today are interrelated. There are no separate questions. When the avian flu came to pay $12 or something. So when we talk about the management of the flu, so there's no financing, whereas in the US, when someone wants to buy a liter of milk, it's already been paid, okay, in the financing. So to be transparent, I repeat one more time that the welfare of animals, it's increased profitability. It does not diminish it.
There we go. I'm on mute. I want to ask a question from, I was going to move to media questions, but let's get through a couple more here. These are more specific about legislation, criminal code questions. The first one is about the fact that animals, they are sentient beings. It's not recognized anywhere in federal legislation, including in the Criminal Code of Canada, which still treats animals as property. So what would your party do to strengthen legislation, federal legislation around treating animals as sentient with regard to protecting animal well-being? And for that one, we'll start with Monsieur Perron.
Yeah, I can go on this. I want to confirm that the Quebec government voted in December 2015 an unanimous law on the welfare, animal welfare, and the safety of animals to recognize that animals are sentient beings, they are biological interaction. When I talked about the advancements, I invite all the people to create such a law because we favor that. The only issue that we have as well, the Bloc, is if we try to erase Quebec laws, if compatible or complement, we try to create a homogeneity in Canada. We agree. However, we have to let the authorities take care of that. So we have to legislate on that. The animals are sentient beings, and in 2025, we have to make sure that there's no mistreatment of animals.
And Mr. Erskine-Smith.
So I'll start with the science of it because it's a useful place to start, which is animals are sentient and they think, love, feel, and they obviously deserve our compassion, and the laws should reflect that reality. Of course they should. Now, when it comes to the criminal code, this is how Elizabeth was sort of dredging up old memories. This does as well, because the bill that I introduced in early 2016 after my first getting elected in October 2015, I really went back to different bills that had been introduced that almost had become law. And there was one bill on addressing animal cruelty through the criminal code that had been introduced by Liberal Justice Ministers Irwin Cotler, Martin Cochon, and McClellan. It had been debated in Parliament up and down over and over again. And there was just a consistent conservative misinformation. And look, it gets down to the level where it would be in an agricultural magazine, and then I would start getting asked questions about it by people who were genuinely confused and genuinely concerned that it might impact their livelihoods. And so we have to be careful in politics about how we frame things. But, in the criminal code, animals in the property section doesn't make sense. It should be a standalone section for cruelty to animals. Of course it should, because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about cruelty to property. That's not why it's in the criminal code. But there's, in my experience and the experience that even came before me, there's just a consistent difficulty of making that change. And so I would say Quebec was able to do this because Quebec was able to recognize sentience through by saying this is an approach we're taking that wasn't impacting existing criminal code legislation that had existed for hundreds of years. And so my only caution, I suppose, on this is in politics, you want to be pragmatic enough to say is the outcome? Are we going to see results because of the change that are going to be commensurate and worthwhile, given all the challenges we're going to confront in getting this political change through? And on that, I don't know. It's obviously, of course, animals are sentient. I just honestly, I would want to, if I were to go back and think through it again, would I have taken on that exact same fight and sent the bill sideways in some ways? I would want to be crystal clear that I was going to see not just a important symbolic change nonetheless, but a more substantive change that would improve the lives for animals. So of course we need to recognize the sentience of animals. I just don't know the criminal code becomes the mechanism to do that.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who has worked around animals, you can absolutely recognize sentience. You know that animals have a range of emotional responses to the conditions that they're in. That much is just plainly obvious. I think the way I would approach this is, when we talk about the criminal code, we have to recognize that number one, it's a reactive instrument, right? So it usually comes into play after the fact. Now, that's not to say that it's not important. I think that is an important part of the legislative tools that we have at our disposal, particularly as federal politicians. But I'm also interested in the other side, is the proactiveness. So what measures can we put into place so that the criminal code, while sometimes necessary, is not relied on 100% of the time? And I think in that case, it comes down to the welfare of animals. And I think the welfare of animals to respect that sentience, to respect the emotional range that they have, to respect the living conditions they have, we need to put a lot of effort also into the proactive side to make sure that welfare standards have proper oversight, that we are encouraging folks to adopt standard codes of practice that are universally agreed upon and are backed up by the best science surrounding the issue of animal welfare. So that's how I would like to approach it. I would just like to say that the criminal code is important, but I'm just wary of relying too much on after the fact legislation. I'm much more interested in also the proactive nature of it as well.
Ms. May?
I think we need to do both. We need to have legislation that recognizes that animals are sentient beings under Canadian law. But an argument that's very strong for the criminal code is that dangerous psychopaths who go on to kill humans start with torturing animals. Police will tell you this in every community. So let's do both. Let's have one piece of legislation that recognizes that animals are sentient beings. Many things will flow from that. In the same time, or subsequently, we amend the criminal code to take animals out of the property section and significantly increase the seriousness with which criminal justice takes cruelty towards animals, particularly where it's deliberate or sadistic. And that will perhaps definitely nip in the bud the kind of desperately ill people who go on to kill people. That's an argument that doesn't scare farmers. That's an argument that doesn't go right to the heart of people thinking that this is a slippery slope. This is about identifying threats to a community and security and safety. And that's an argument where I know the police chiefs will back us up.
Okay, thank you. I want to move to a question from Liam Casey at the Canadian Press. He would like to know what each of the parties will do for the belugas at Marineland in Niagara Falls, Ontario. The belugas are dying at an alarming rate. And specifically for Nate, why hasn't his government done anything to help those remaining belugas? So, Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things here. I mean, the legislative effort that Willie Moore ultimately started and Murray Sinclair concluded in the Senate, and then Elizabeth and I played a small role in sort of jointly seconding and making sure that the party was supportive of it as much as I could. That was an important step, and the challenge, of course, is that people will rightly throw up their hands and say, "Hang on a second, but marine land still exists," and because the existing animals were grandfathered. And so, what happens? Well, I think there's two things that functionally have to happen. One, where they're transferring those animals, we have to make sure that DFO takes a very firm view that everything has to be in the best interest of those animals, because in transportation there are great risks to these animals even. And the second piece is there's there's an effort to realize a sanctuary in Nova Scotia. And in the discussions that I've had with those that are behind the sanctuary, they're actually not looking for federal funding. Where we could support efforts, though, is helping to pay for the transportation in a secure and safe way. And so as the sanctuary is established, I think that is the critical role that we can and should play, and that DFO, frankly, should play in making sure that we're realizing the efforts of the sanctuary and those behind it, but also realizing the best interests of these animals.
Ms. May?
Yeah, it's a incredible tragedy that after all the work done through Parliament to ban the keeping of cetaceans in captivity, that and as Nate correctly recalls, there was a grandfathering for existing whales. We need to get them to sanctuaries. There's 18 belugas that have died at Marineland since 2019. This is not acceptable. So it will take funding to assist moving those animals as compassionately and carefully as possible. Again, the legislation S203 speaks to the best interests of the individual animal. So moving them compassionately, carefully to a sanctuary area is the solution. It should be done as soon as possible for the remaining cetaceans at Marineland. Marineland was really brilliant. I have to say that the Senate, the conservative senators on S203 used to wonder how did they manage to get captured so effectively by Marineland, but it took a while to get the bill through because of the opposition and the conservative senators. Now the bill is law. We need to rescue those animals from Marineland as compassionately and quickly as possible.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, I don't know if I can add much to what both Elizabeth and Nathaniel already voiced, other than, I was proud to be a supporter of Bill S203 in the 42nd Parliament. And I think, yeah, we did our part legislatively, but obviously more needs to be done. And I'm not as familiar with the story as others coming from British Columbia, but I think the track record of just the sheer number of deaths at Marineland amongst these animals, and the fact that Parliament has already given a voice that we condemn this kind of behavior, and we've actually passed a law to forbid it from happening in the future. It's now incumbent upon existing ministries of the federal government to step up, and as has already been mentioned, DFO is the first one that comes to mind. To make sure that we're looking after these animals' needs in a proper way.
Monsieur Perron?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm in the same situation as Alistair, being outside. What I understand of the situation, it's an awful drama to take care of this animal. So, when we have animals in captivity which are not, well, we have to look at options if we can put them back and give them back their freedom. Unfortunately, many of these animals that were being captive is difficult. So probably we can, as Mrs. May said about the sanctuary, the animal would be the best solution to put an end to this situation. And as a government, as a state, what can we act? Send my message to act for the next generation, so that not in 4 years, make sure that we can vote, that we work to prevent those kinds of type of situations, disaster situation in the future.
All right, the next question is the Globe and Mail, Marie Wolf. Do the panel members have a view on Canada allowing macaques from Cambodia to be imported to Charles River Laboratories in Canada, despite restrictions on their import in the US following evidence that some may have been born in the wild? Ms. May, I'll start with you.
Yes, we have a view on that, and thanks to Marie Wolf from the Globe and Mail, we would not support the importation of macaques from Cambodia into Canada for the reasons that are implicit in the information that we know they were taken from the wild, and they should be able to remain there in their natural habitat.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, that's coming down to a level of specificity that you probably won't see in any party's proposal, but I think it covers the same ground as one of the first questions that was asked when this debate began, which was on the international wildlife trade. And again, I think there are so many ways that we can learn about animals without having to remove them from their natural habitats. We've already talked about the risks associated with the international wildlife trade. So I think I would find myself on side with the researchers who have been urging the federal government to act on this matter.
Monsieur Perron?
Well, of course, as Alistair has mentioned, it touched all the questions that we dealt this morning, or this in terms of international trade, wildlife and international trade, and also the welfare, all the coherence. I believe. I'm sorry, I don't hear very well. The animal prisoners that are taken, you have to put them back in freedom. We have to intervene so that it does not reoccur, and also. Beyond that, when these the animals are in laboratory, they receive the treatment. I'm talking about this macaque, receive the test, alternative testing to avoid cruelties on animals. So it touches a lot of files. It's a decision that has to be made.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Right. So, I mean, Canada is a signatory to the Convention to Protect Endangered Species, CITES, and the Secretariat to CITES has recommended that there be a suspension of trade, and we should follow that recommendation. We're a signatory to CITES. We should be prioritizing the protection of endangered species, and we should suspend that trade.
Okay, the next question is from Miranda Anthistle with Global News, and she wants to know, as it sits in Canada, we have ag-gag laws, which have been put in place to prohibit recording at factory farms and fur farms. Animal activists will say these laws are unjust and in place to only protect the Canadian agriculture industry. Where does your party stand when it comes to these ag-gag laws? Mr. MacGregor, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we had an example in the previous parliament with John Barlow, a Conservative MP, and his bill C-275. So I initially voted in favor of that bill at second reading because I wanted to have a close examination of it at committee. It did not pass muster with me after our committee hearings, and so therefore the NDP voted against it at third reading. The problem is that bills like C-275, first of all, veer into the jurisdiction of the province. It's not a valid exercise of federal criminal law power. The second part is that it identifies people who are not on a farming property with lawful excuse and intent, when in fact the research shows, because they put this under the rubric of biosecurity concerns. The research shows that most of the biosecurity outbreaks on farms have actually been caused by people who were there with lawful authority and excuse. So one of the amendments I tried to make to Bill C-275 was to make its provisions apply to everyone equally, including on-farm employees. Because if we are serious about tackling biosecurity, we should make it applicable to everyone. Unfortunately, most of the committee voted against that amendment, and therefore, when the bill came to third reading, I could not support it because it was quite obvious, to me at least, that the bill was using biosecurity as a cover and in fact designed for one purpose, and it veered into the trespass jurisdiction of the provinces.
Okay, Mr. Perron.
Thank you. Of course, we worked on that, the same kind of project, intrusion and protection of animals. We voted in favor because we wanted to protect our farmers from any aggressions. However, that doesn't mean that we're not there for the animal welfare, because what we looked at into is that agencies, when we complain, when instead of the person has to go at the location to take pictures, to the demonstration, agencies that we refer have to be efficient in what they do. So there's no tolerance for the welfare, animal welfare, to introduce the welfare animals. It's extremely important. I repeated many times today, but we don't believe that the best way is to do intrusion on farms.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
We have confidentiality rules, and then we have exceptions to those rules for whistleblowing. We have trespassing rules, and then there are exceptions to those rules for undercover investigations in the public interest. And to the extent that ag-gag legislation is eliminating the idea of undercover investigations in the public interest, we should all be opposed to that kind of legislation. And look, biosecurity is important on farms. Of course it is. I introduced legislation that in the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act that spoke specifically to the need to improve biosecurity, especially on industrial, intensive agriculture, animal agriculture, farming operations. Alistair's right. I mean, the biosecurity risk is not from undercover investigators who are exposing animal cruelty. That just is the facts do not bear that out. And so, look, the bill at best is virtue signaling. It doesn't add anything, and at its worst, it is a detriment to the public interest.
Okay. I do want to get to one audience question. I'll just ask that.
Is there time for me to answer that one?
Pam. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. May. Did I miss you? My apologies. Go ahead.
Well, it's okay. Well, since all members of the NDP voted for C-205, I appreciate hearing Alistair's explanation, second reading, and Bloc Québécois voted for it at second reading. Most Conservatives did as well. The Green Party opposed it from the get-go. It was transparently an effort to suppress free speech, to shield the industry from having people see what goes on. So ag-gag laws are not
Oh, I think we lost Ms. May. She's frozen. If we get her back, we'll let her finish her thoughts. But in the meantime,
free speech.
oh, there she is.
Elle est revenue.
Did you want to finish your thought? I think we missed the last sentence of yours.
Fine.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I said this was a transparent attempt to suppress free speech. Greens opposed C-205 at second reading, and right down the line, it was not about John Barlow's fig leaf excuses for why it was needed. It was never needed. There's ways to protect farms from illegal trespass, and C-205 was clearly not something that anyone should have voted for at any stage. Sorry for freezing there for a bit. Thank you.
Okay, the final question, it comes from the audience. Just ask the candidates keep their answers really brief on this one so we can get to closing remarks. The question from the audience is, in many parts of Canada, landlords can refuse to rent you an apartment if you have a pet. The renters market is already a mess, so this leads to the abandonment of pets. What are you going to do about it as a federal government with influence over provinces through the federal housing funding? For this one, we'll start with Ms. May.
It's a tough one because of federal jurisdiction being so limited in this area. As someone who's never lived without a dog being part of my family, I've faced this a lot when I was a single mom trying to find a place to live so we didn't have to give up our dog. It's a question of, I think it's a question of rights for renters, but landlords have the upper hand in every case, and there are really strict provisions around a lot of leases I've had to sign in order to be allowed to have a dog with me. And the abandonment of pets because of landlord rules is a real tragedy, and it does take work, but I think it's mostly in the provincial domain. So what we would do is continue to work, if we could attach it as a condition for federally funded housing, that at least we can do because that's federal.
Mr. MacGregor?
Yeah, it is a tough one because of the jurisdiction. You know, certainly the NDP has been very active in trying to protect renters' rights. We have been very critical of, you know, corporate landlords buying up affordable housing stock and rent evicting folks. So, I mean, there's a few possibly financial tools that you can use, but it's really tough. And, you know, I think I'll echo all of my colleagues in saying that one of my favorite parts about door knocking during a federal campaign is meeting everyone's pets. And so many wonderful cats and dogs are the first ones to greet you when you press the doorbell. And it just really is lovely. But yeah, it's really tough. I mean, especially for people who are living by themselves, that's their only companion in life. And, you know, when you're on a fixed income and you have limited options available to you, that's just another barrier that you're setting up to folks. So that is a consideration. It's very tough as a federal politician to get to that level of specificity.
Okay, Monsieur Perron.
Mr. Perron, I think it's my turn. So I will say the same thing as my other colleagues. It's a very delicate question because of the legislation jurisdiction. I will answer now on a personal basis is that we have to allow this always, of course, in the pet is not aggressive for the neighbors, and that he doesn't make those. It's always, but the aspect of the pets, the companion, also the concept, also for zootherapy, it's very important because it also has a lot of consequences. So on July 1st, like everywhere else in Canada, we have a rate of abandonment of pets that is increasing and that is very, very high. And this brings and also it brings also we place these pets into other houses, and this doesn't always work, but because this was good companions to certain people. So it's really, I don't know how we could act on this without touching on the jurisdiction of Quebec and other provinces. So definitely there's an openness to this.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
So a few things. One, Ontario is a jurisdiction that has rules in place that says you can't discriminate against tenants who have pets. Why? Because pets are members of the family, and it's outrageous to discriminate on that basis. And so I think all provincial jurisdictions should adopt the rule that Ontario currently has. The sky hasn't fallen. It's a good thing for tenants. On that, I did sponsor a petition that called for including this rule in our Tenants' Bill of Rights. And the challenge, and others have articulated this already on jurisdiction, that Tenants' Bill of Rights was before my time, before I became housing minister. I've only been the minister for a few short months. My joke is I've served for 4 months as housing minister, but under 2 prime ministers. And that's all to say, like this is before my time, but when you look at the Tenants' Bill of Rights, it's pretty high level. Like it's a blueprint. It doesn't get into the specificity required to address something like this. And so I think from a federal perspective, you've got to use your convening power through, bringing the housing ministers together. And security of tenure is not a federal responsibility, but it is something that should be on the table in those conversations in the renewal of the national housing strategy. And an issue like this should be, of course, on the table to say, what are best practices across jurisdictions? The federal government can convene and can pull those best practices together, and then to say to other provinces, here, we encourage you to do this as we renew the national housing strategy.
Okay, that concludes the questions, and I want to give everyone here an opportunity to make closing remarks to the audience that is watching. And for that, you have a minute. Mr. Perron, I'll start with you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Wong.
No, thank you very much, Mrs. Wong. It's a great debate, and thank you for the invitation. And I hope we answered your questions to clear this of all the positions of the political parties, and also everybody lives with their own choices. From now, we have an election that's very important in a couple of days only. So I invite all the people that have listened to this debate really to go pronounce and make their choice. And of course, every one of us will ask you to put the X specific, but also the participation, democracy is very important. So we can count on the Bloc Québécois to prioritize also the animal welfare. And as I said, our policies are aligned with and take this into consideration when we speak about a local, when we preserve the gestion. So I invite everybody to look after. We will bring this on the first week. It not only preserves also the agriculture for the animal welfare, but also for rural communities, but not only Quebec, but also within Canada. So I call Mr. Smith also to take this legislation, this bill. Also, we want this law to be adopted, to pass.
Mr. MacGregor.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting this important debate. It is a shame that there is one party missing in action, but I'm very glad for the conversation today. And, I would also like to thank the various organizations who care very deeply about animal welfare for the principled stands they've taken, for the great committee interventions that they've made, whether it's an examination of legislation or the various reports that we've done at the Agriculture Committee. Your advice and insight and expertise has always been very valued. And look, I think animal welfare as a subject obviously is very important to a lot of Canadians. It should be a top line agenda item for anything that we do from the federal government's perspective. And there are, when it comes to farming practices, I just want everyone listening to know there are a lot of farmers who are really leading the way in this. They care deeply about their animals, and it's not like the what and the why, but it's the how they're farmed. So I would just we have to, as a Canadian society, find a way to bring all of these different voices to the table to chart a path forward and look at examples that are already being done. There's some incredible people out there who are really pioneering this. And it's just a very real privilege for me, not only as the representative of a very beautiful riding out here on Vancouver Island, but also someone who has been involved on the agriculture file for quite some time now to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for hosting us. And more importantly, thank you to everyone who's listening today.
Ms. May?
Thanks. I really want to thank the organizations involved here, that Animal Justice, Montreal, SPCA, Vancouver Humane Society, the BC SPCA, and World Animal Protection for your advocacy all the time and not just during elections. This has been a rare chance. This is my first national debate with other parties in this entire election as co-leader of the Green Party, with the Greens having the strongest platform on animal welfare. Every single Green candidate across Canada is backed by a platform that calls for strong advocacy and action and legislative change within Canada to recognize animals as sentient beings, to concern ourselves with their welfare, yes, to transition farming practices to ones that are humane, not to shut down farming, but to ensure that it's compassionate and humane, remembering Gandhi's words that you judge a society by how it treats its animals. We as a country can do better. Canadians support us moving forward to protect animal welfare. And if elected, I certainly will, and my colleagues across the country in the Green Party will as well. Thank you.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Well, thanks so much for hosting. Look, animal protections should not be a partisan issue, and I hope you've seen a sense of collaboration across party lines here. My commitment to you is I will continue to be a voice for animals so long as I am in Parliament. On a personal note, I have worked with colleagues here on your screen across party lines. I'll continue to do so, and I'll work in my caucus too. I mean, I helped found the Liberal Animal Welfare Caucus. We've worked across, through a more open, all-party animal welfare caucus. We've done a lot of good. There are colleagues in the Liberal Party like Julie DeBruzen who are stand shoulder to shoulder in getting this work done. So I think those sort of personal efforts should be recognized, and there are certain voices that stand out more than others. I think on a party basis, though, look, and not to put too fine a point on it, you have a situation where every single time a piece of legislation stalled, it was because of Conservatives. Every single time a piece of animal legislation in particular stalled, it was because of the Conservative Senate leader, Don Plett. I can't put it more bluntly than that. Like it's a conservative, not someone low on the totem pole. The highest person in the Conservative Party in the Senate was specifically tasked with blocking animal welfare and animal protection legislation. And you contrast that with look, we're ready to work across party lines, but you contrast that with a Liberal government that has seen action to address animal cruelty in the criminal code, that has passed laws on that has seen action to support Elizabeth's efforts to ban cetaceans in captivity, action to ban cosmetic testing on animals, to phase out toxicity testing on animals, to ban shark finning. You've got commitments in the course of this election, and they're commitments from the party, not just me, to ban live export of horses for slaughter, to reinstate and to pass S15, the Jane Goodall Act, to address the wildlife trade. And look, I'm not suggesting progress is perfect, but we've seen more action on animals from this Liberal government than any government in my lifetime. And you contrast that with the ready alternative in this election that actively impedes these efforts. I hope the choice for those listening, I hope the choice is a clear one.
Okay, thank you so much for everyone joining us here today, for tuning in. On behalf of Animal Justice, Montreal SPCA, Vancouver Humane Society, World Animal Protection, and the BC SPCA, we thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Take care.
Carmen, thank you for being a wonderful moderator.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
My
thank
pleasure.
you. That was great.